Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can learn more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Kartar Diamond. Kartar Diamond is a Feng Shui consultant, and you can find out more about Kartar Diamond and her wonderful work at her website, fengshuisolutions.net. Welcome, Kartar Diamond.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So for our audience, in this show, we're going to be talking about what is period 9 Feng Shui. What is that? So before we talk about what is period 9 Feng Shui, Kartar Diamond, can you give us a brief introduction to your Feng Shui training and professional background?
Yes, I began studying Feng Shui in 1990 and consulting around 1992. So for over 30 years now, I've been a professional consultant trained in a classical tradition. A lot's happened, and when I first started, I never dreamed that I would be doing it full time, but it turned into that rather quickly. And I became a teacher and an author, and I have my own school. So my background is with, classical Feng Shui, but I've been introduced to or have studied a variety of different Feng Shui styles. And as of for apropos today, I get a lot of questions about this new period that we're in. So I know we'll dive into that today too.
So Kartar Diamond, will you share with our audience the names of some of your books?
Yes. Well, my first book is called Feng Shui for Skeptics, Real Solutions Without Superstition. And I really felt like that was a great first book for me to write because there were a lot of superstitions and a lot of misinformation floating around during the heyday of Feng Shui being quite trendy. And that book actually gets into a fair amount of advanced material at a beginner's level. And I spent a lot of time in the book dispensing a lot of the myths and the superstitions. My second book, The Feng Shui Matrix, Another Way to Inherit the Earth, focuses actually on the personal, like what's good for one person may not be good for another. So there are chapters which cover, what might be your good romance direction based on your Chinese zodiac sign, or what might be a really good lucky prosperity area of your house, again, based on your birth data. So that's kind of the focus of that book. And I also talk about the hidden agenda of every house, which is energy at the center core of every house, like the soul of the house, based on when it was built and what direction it's facing. And then my third book, The Feng Shui Continuum, A Blueprint for Balanced Living, actually instructs readers on how to create what we call a flying star chart, which is like the natal chart of a house based on when it was built, its compass alignment, how to interpret the energy blueprint of that house using classical methods like 5-element theory, where to put water, where to put fire, where to put metal. And I go into other things in that book about special house types and special techniques that are normally considered quite advanced. And since I wrote those 3 books, they've become part of my school's curriculum. I've expanded on those books for the serious student, but they're the bulk of my course curriculum.
All right. Now, Kartar Diamond, can you explain for our audience what exactly is period 9 Feng Shui?
Okay. Well, in classical Feng Shui, or specifically what's called Shuang Kong Fei Xing, the flying star school, it's one type of Feng Shui. We have these 9 periods that last for 20 years, and then they repeat. And so we have a 180-year complete cycle, and then it starts over again. We just ended period 8 from 2004 up until 2024 was period 8. Now we're starting period 9 from 2024 to 2044. So things change. These periods, they affect every house, some more than others, but we call them stars. Every star, like the 9 star, goes through a phase kind of like infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, senior life. So they change their influence over time. Same house, but we could even say that a house that had great feng shui in 1950 might not affect the occupants that way now in current times, or vice versa. Some houses start out not so good and they're better now. So period 9 is a big deal. And starting over a year ago, a lot of people had questions from me about this upcoming period, especially in design phase. And this has happened to be twice now. At the end of period 7 in 2003, when we were starting period 8 in 2004, I had clients in the design phase who were saying, should we hurry up and build, or should we wait until the next cycle clicks in? And that happened again in 2023 also, wondering, are we going to build a better house in one period versus the next? So it's a cycle, and it's kind of like astrology. Things change over time.
So Kartar Diamond, when did period 9 begin? And again, keep in mind, people will be listening and watching this video for years to come.
Right.
And when will period 9 end? And what can we expect in period 9 of Feng Shui?
Well, officially, in Feng Shui, we go by a solar calendar, and that's something that is confusing to a number of people because there's so much emphasis on the Chinese lunar calendar, which changes and vacillates by weeks. Some years the lunar calendar starts in January, sometimes in February, but the Feng Shui solar calendar always starts around February 4th. It might vacillate a little bit by 24 hours, but not much. And it represents the midway point between the December solstice and the March equinox. It's the halfway point. And that's when energy does shift on a global level annually, not just these big 20-year cycles, but annually. And so around February 4th, 2024, we started period 9 officially. However, the influence of these stars does come into manifestation well before that exact date. It's kind of like when people talk about the current state of affairs in the world we're in, about how we're 2 minutes to midnight, when it comes to the global stress that we're under. But with this 180-year cycle, when you're only 2 or 3 years away from a new cycle, of course, you're going to see the manifestations of that new cycle as well. So there's a lot we could say about, what's unique about period 9 or what we can expect.
And when will period 9 end?
In 20 years, in 2044, around February 4th of 2044. And these 20-year eras, they're related to the 7 stars and the 2 assistant stars, totaling 9, of the Big Dipper. Some people think the 20-year cycle is related to this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction every 19, 20 years, but the jury's out on whether that's really what we're adhering to in Feng Shui. I think it has more to do with other stars and planets.
So what can we expect from period 9 Feng Shui over the next 20 years?
Well, every period can represent some things personally, down in people's homes, and it can also represent things in general terms globally. Now, for instance, the star 9 is associated with the element of fire. And you can imagine there are so many different manifestations of fire and symbolism around fire. I mean, we can talk about literal fire, forest fires. We can talk about solar flares. We can talk about war and explosions, things like that. In And in fact, prior to period 9, whenever the 9 star was paired with another star, as they are in a chart for a house, we would just say it intensifies whatever it's around. Now, the 9 star is the Lee trigram in the trigram system, is also associated with the eyes and the heart. Are we going to see more health issues with the heart? I think we already have post-COVID vaccination, right? We're going to see perhaps maybe some great things in medical breakthroughs regarding the eyes and the heart, hopefully. We can say that the Lee trigram in the family structure is associated with a middle-aged woman. And so we may be moving into a more matriarchal society in period 9, which has already, started a little bit. And, sometimes we think of the United States as being like the leader in everything. I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case. Other countries have had female prime ministers and presidents, Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, but the US has yet to have a female president. But that could likely happen in period 9, this latest rendition of period 9. So yeah, a number of things. Also, the 9 energy, when it was back in a bad phase, like right now it's king, it's period 9, so it's at its most positive. But if we go back like 50, 60 years ago when it was in a negative phase, the 9 star was associated with mental illness, problems with the mind, and fire. When I think of fire, we say somebody's very bright when they're intelligent. So there's that extrapolation of symbolism. So it was in a bad phase. Now it's in a good phase, still related to the mind. And so again, we see AI, artificial intelligence. We're going to probably have some, quote, medical breakthroughs related to the mind and projection, maybe even telepathy, psychic awareness, so I think it could be really good in a lot of ways, period 9. A lot of spiritual people would be like, finally.
Finally, yes. That is so fascinating. Now, so we just came out of period 8, which I understand was earth element, right? And from what I understand, have read about period 9, earth element was relatively stable. And I just laughed when you think about what we've been through. That didn't feel stable all that much during the pandemic, for sure. And period 9 is more about transformation. So what is the transformation that period 9 is going to bring?
Well, when people do make predictions, and for instance, my lane is Feng Shui specifically, but I also practice 9 star key, which is related to Feng Shui. Some of my professional peers practice Chinese astrology, and there's a couple of different types of astrology. Ba-Zi and Ziwei Do Shu, namely. And then there are people who do I Ching analysis and predictions or divination. And usually when somebody practices more than one of those predictive arts, they can start making, more accurate predictions about what may happen. Otherwise, we're left to, some kind of general terms. But as an example, venturing out a little bit beyond Feng Shui, the 9 star can also be related to fire, as in like aircraft or spacecraft. So we might then see more happening in terms of revelations about extraterrestrials or visiting other planets, our own human race, things like that. Yeah, but it can be a very intense time. I think there's going to be a reckoning because at the end of the day, the Lee trigram in 9 is fire, and people are going to have to possibly make some very big transitions mentally in order to survive some of the more negative things that might be occurring in this upcoming period.
And with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, medical intuitive healer Catherine Carrigan, and we're listening to Kartar Diamond, author of 3 books about Feng Shui consultant, and we'll be right back learning more about period 9. Kartar Diamond, Feng Shui consultant and author. So you explained really well that there are basically these periods in Feng Shui actually last 180 years. So they're 20-year periods. Are there some things that are unique about period 9 that do not exist in the other periods in Feng Shui?
Mhm. Yeah, as I reviewed what we call the period 9 charts, I came to certain revelations myself because I hadn't really been paying attention to them until recently. We have in classical feng shui something called 4 major house types. And they're loosely described. One of the ones that's considered the best house type is called Wang Shang Wang Shui, which means good for people, good for money. Good for people means good for health and relationships and fertility and all the things related to relationships and living, but money is money or career. And so that's one of the best house types in a general category. Then we have the opposite house type, which we refer to as reversed because it's the reverse or the opposite of the best house type. So the shorthand, we say bad for people, bad for money. And there are remedies for these house types. You're not doomed, if you live in a reverse house type. And then there are the mixed houses. There's one called double facing, and that one is considered good for money, but not so good for health and relationships. And then double sitting, good for people, good for the health and relationships, but not as strong for financial luck. So those 4 house types exist in most of the periods, most of the 9 periods. In fact, we just came from period 8, and houses built in period 8 had all 4 of those house types. They're determined by the compass reading, the compass direction. Now in period 9, what's one thing that's unique about it is we only have 2 of those 4 house types being built. So that can even suggest, again, like what's going to happen in period 9 for people who are building new homes or businesses. We have the double sitting house and the double facing. So these new constructions are either going to be good for money, bad for people, or the opposite. So that's something to kind of mull over. In fact, when I'm helping people in the design phase, and some people are, they want to build in these developments. And I've asked them, because these house types can be fixed based on the land level. And so I've asked them, okay, so you're, based on what direction this house has to go, are you going to have higher land level in the back or lower land level, or what's across the street? So it matters on that level. Another thing that's unique about period 9 is that of all these house types we have in the Flying Star School of Feng Shui, we have 144 different charts, possible charts. And these stars with the numerical coding that's attached to them are paired up. So if we have 9 stars paired up with each other, we have 81 different possibilities. So not every house has the same stars. Like for instance, my front door area is in a 6-6 area, or my guest bedroom is in a 8-4 area, 2 numbers paired up, and they mean something and they have a relationship as elements. So not every house has 6-6 or 4-8 or any of these other combinations in my house. But in the period 9 house construction, there are only going to be 9, no matter what direction the houses face. And there's 16 different possibilities a house can face, but they're all going to have the same 9 stars. same combinations, 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5, 9-9. And so it might bring a certain level of monotony or similarity of experiences that people are going to have who live in those new house types. So we'll see how that pans out. I haven't experienced that yet as a consultant advising people.
Well, part of the reason, Kartar Diamond, I was so excited to interview you, and I'll keep this brief, but my house is about 80 years old, and I live in Atlanta, so my house is built roughly around 1940. And what's funny is every year I try and update my Feng Shui, and I've worked with wonderful Feng Shui consultants, and everyone who comes, one of the first things they say, even I'll never forget, even the bug inspector, he came in, he said, your house has really good energy. And I just laughed, because even people who don't know anything about energy can feel it. So anyway, so what's funny is that last year in 2023, everything started falling apart. And by everything, I mean the heating and the air conditioning, the water heater, the dehumidifier, and then I started having leaks in the roof. And so this week, actually, I am getting an entirely new roof on my house. And I'm having later in the following week, I'm having the foundation worked on. And when I was reading about period 9 Feng Shui, one of the things that I read was that one of the ways to bring your home into period 9 is by getting a new roof. And I thought, okay, well, I'm getting swept up in this energy, right? So whether you want to or not, all this stuff is happening. And if you're a homeowner, you have to fix it. So how does getting a new roof help update an existing home into period 9?
Well, this is something that's a little bit controversial in the different styles and practitioners of Feng Shui. And I've had, I stopped keeping track 10 or so years ago, but I've had over 6,000 clients. I have a lot of experience. And from the tradition that I started with and studied with, in fact, most of my teachers and mentors, we agree that a house assumes energy based on when it was built, because there's this combination of energy from below and energy from above meeting in the house. And then when the roof goes on, that seals the energy. And so when somebody is re-roofing, as long as the ceiling stays intact, that energy stays intact. So you're not creating a period 9 house just because you're changing your roof. You would have to open up the ceiling on all floors to the sky, or a significant portion of the ceiling removed, so that literally rays of sunshine can come into and hit the ground floor, and that could create a new period for the house. So and I've had a lot of experience, people validating that even when their house has been remodeled and gutted inside. I always use the analogy that it's like a person who's had a lot of cosmetic surgery, where they may look different, but they're the same person.
Yeah.
So
even if you're
that's
like
my input.
Tearing off the wood, that's what they're doing with my house. They're tearing off the wood and then replacing. So that might be, yeah. So I suspect there will be some sunlight coming in when they do it, right?
Well, if they remove the roof and sun shining into an attic, but you still have your ceiling intact, for the vast majority of it, it's going to retain the energy. And I get questions all the time where people say, well, what if I put in a skylight? Or what if I add on? It really depends on how a person adds on to their house. Like, for instance, let's say somebody builds a second story, but they keep the first floor intact and they only cut open a small area for like your standard sized staircase, 3 feet wide, let's say. You're going to have a separation of energies. Whereas if, like I said, if you gut it and let's say it's an 800 square foot house, you open it up to the sky, you add a second story and double the square footage, then you can assume that the newer energy, if it's a newer period, will sort of take over. It's a big area for me in my practice of advising people, and we have something called construction Shah, where we're always trying to avoid doing constructions in bad timing and certain annual cycles. But you know, there's famous feng shui personalities who say that if you remove 3 tiles from your house, that it's a new period. And there's people who say, you know, let's say your house is built in 1940, but if you move in 2024, that all of a sudden it's a period 9 house. I disagree. So there's these different theories, date of occupancy and current period, and these might be shadow influences and overlay. But I have gotten so much positive feedback that the house retains its original construction period chart decade after decade. Now, the influence is different. And like I gave that example of how going back 50 years ago, wherever the 9 star was in somebody's house, it could have a bad influence. And if it was the bedroom, which is the most important room in the house, it could indicate mental illness, someone crazy. Now, if somebody has that 9 star energy in their bedroom, it can mean they'll be very healthy. Or if it's in what we call the 9 water dragon, they could be very wealthy. So things change, but some things stay the same. like simply removing a roof.
Great explanation. So what can we do to update our homes into period 9?
Well, as with any initial consultation or with annual updates, which a lot of practitioners provide, we want to look at what is the new interpretation as all of these stars scroll through a different cycle. I get this image in my head all the time of like cogs in a wheel and how they're clicking over. And for instance, one of the biggest changes in period 9 is not what's happening with the 9 star, but what's happening with star 2. And for over 100 years, the 2 star has been associated with sickness, loneliness, miscarriage, problems with the abdominal area, digestion, reproductive area. And if that energy was in somebody's bedroom, we would say, yeah, these kind of things can manifest if you don't have a remedy for it. Now that we're in period 9, 9 is like A+, king. But what follows is 1 and 2. So 1 is like vice president waiting to take over as president. It'll be 20 years, but it's waiting. And the 2 star has now shifted into a phase of being like reborn after having been dead, you know, for 60 years in a bad phase. Now it's starting to have a positive influence. And so whether somebody hires, you know, a flying star practitioner or whether they read, you know, like specifically my 3rd book, The Feng Shui Continuum, you can chart out your house. You can see where these stars lie. You can see what kind of influence they have currently and decide whether or not you want to enhance those energies with elements or whether you want to weaken them with what we call a reductive element. And so there are certain essentials that have to take place. For instance, somebody does need to use a compass. You don't want to just guess what direction a house faces based on, you know, the sun. And I have with me a couple of pictures. You know, here is a traditional feng shui compass called a Lopan. It's a little one that was produced by Master Sang 30 or so years ago. And then here's a real big one that was made by Joey Yap and all the people he's affiliated with. There's different types of feng shui compasses also depending on the type of school one's practicing. I tend to carry a Kamenga military compass in my purse because it's small and it's very accurate. And I do a lot of readings online. So I use remote tools to get aerial views of people's roof line and figure out the compass reading remotely. But you've got to start with an accurate compass reading. Another thing that I do for my clients is I check and see if the magnetic declination has changed over long periods of time, because the magnetic declination can move easterly or westerly by a few degrees or by a lot. And to try to put it more in layman's terms, you might have a house that's 100 years old that currently faces east, but when it was built, it might have faced southeast or northeast. It might have shifted enough to be a different house type. So that's a whole thing on compass readings. And what I do, I literally see this little compass transparency. I'll take that, let's say I have a floor plan, and once I have the accurate compass reading, I'm going to lay that right over the floor plan so that I really know where these directional areas are. And then they also fan out beyond the house. So we can even talk about that if you like, of remedies for the outside of the house in period 9. But we have to start with what's called the geometric center. And then through the floor plan and just outside, like in a front yard or backyard or side yard, we can know where these directions stop and start.
Now, Kartar Diamond, I really appreciate that you bring up the compass, because so many people go, oh, I just read the energy. No, 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 no. If real Feng Shui people use a compass. And can you explain for our audience, why is it critical to use a compass to determine Feng Shui?
Well, it's a higher level. Like, just to backtrack, there is a whole branch of Feng Shui called form school and landscape school. And for that branch of Feng Shui, a lot of it is common sense, or what we call yin yang theory. And for that, you don't have to have a compass. For instance, if a house is chronically dark, the occupants are going to be depressed. If you live in an area where it's noisy all the time, we call that sha. Anything that affects your 5 senses that's negative, that's bad Feng Shui, and you don't particularly have to have a compass. But for instance, how this next level comes in, let's say your chimney is dilapidated and crumbling and falling apart. That's bad. That collects negative energy. Let's say it's in the west sector of your house, and you know that because you've taken a compass reading. The west happens to be associated with the mouth, teeth, the jaw, the breasts. So we might even be able to predict, oh, the occupant in that house could have those health issues. Well, what if the chimney that's broken down is in the east sector? That's associated with the feet, the throat, the thyroid, the nervous system. So we can get more accurate about just about everything when we have the relative compass directions for the house, as well as what's going on around the house. You might be doing a remodel of your bathroom in a bad direction for the year, or what if your neighbor is ripping out a tree in the bad direction in relation to your house, that kind of thing. So on and on, there's so many examples of where the compass reading is really important. And in fact, we don't just want to know what the 8 basic directions are. We have, and we'll see if we can put this up close enough, there are 24 different possible directions that a house could face. And so, for instance, 70 degrees is within the parameters of east. 90 degrees is also east, but they're totally different house types. In fact, when I was referring to those 4 major house types, good for money, bad for money, every 15 degrees, we have a different house type. So it's not enough to just say, oh, it faces south or north. We want to know within a few degrees of accuracy what that is. In fact, there are some other forms of Feng Shui where you have to know within a degree. That school would drive me crazy, but there is that level too.
Okay, and with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. You're listening to the Natural Healing Show. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author, and we're listening to Kartar Diamond explain period 9 in Feng Shui. Kartar Diamond, can you give us some examples of what a person can do in period 9 to improve their health and their relationships?
Okay, one of the things that we can do for period 9 is honor the direction of south. Period 9, the Lee trigram, is associated with south. And for health matters, when we build up that area and add, we call a mountain, if not a real one, then a virtual one, out to the south, outside to the south sector of your property, that alone can help improve your health and your relationships. So if somebody has a real mountain or higher land level within a couple feet, to the south, that's already a good thing. But a lot of people do what we call virtual mountains. If you have, let's say, a potted plant, a lot of soil, ceramic pot, that's earthen materials, that can work. Putting a boulder out to the south sector of your house can work. If you happen to have a stone wall, anything that's of earthen material, you could even put up a stone statue, something that makes sense for your property, that can help improve health and relationships. And it's good for 20 years. So it's not something that you're going to have to change, every year. That's one thing that you can do. Also, because period 9 is the ruling energy and south is especially good right now. If you were house hunting and you found a house that faced the middle sector of south, and again, the middle sector is between 173 and 187 degrees. You're using a compass. If it faces the middle sector of south, it can be especially good and supportive for money luck. If the back of the house is to exactly middle dead on south, it can be especially good for health. See, the front is associated with money, the back is associated with health. It's kind of like your spine supports you, but your face is your business card. So those are a couple of techniques that you can use.
So the front of the house has to do with our money luck, and the back of the house has to do with our health luck.
For that particular mountain remedy, yes.
Okay, for the southern direction in period 9. Now, can you give it some examples of what a person could do in period 9 to improve their financial luck?
Okay, we have some calculations that we do. And in fact, in the Feng Shui matrix, I go over what the calculation is for all the different periods. But for period 9, we have not just one, but 2 directions that you can stimulate outside for financial luck. One of them is simply the opposite of south, which is north. So if you were to put a fountain outside to not the north side of your house, but again, specifically the north sector, making sure that you're not to northeast and that you're not to northwest, but north, aim for 0 degrees north. Putting water out there can attract financial luck. It's kind of like your house and its feng shui is a satellite dish. You're either attracting good energy or you're repelling it, but you can add water to the north. That's the #1 best direction. If you happen to have a pool to the north, you're in great shape. You don't have to add a bird bath or a little fountain. And by the way, the more water, the better, because we are trying to emulate a pond. So I tell, the average client, if they have at least 10 or 20 gallons, that's pretty good. But some people, they really get into it and they'll add, a 60-gallon horse trough outside, throw a pond pump in there, and they notice a difference. So if you had hundreds of gallons of water going, that would be great. The second best location is to the southeast. Again, not south, not east, but southeast. Using a compass and all relative to the very center of your home, walk a straight line out, and then you can put water there or both. Some people put water in both of the good locations for each of these periods, and they get a double benefit. So you can do that.
Now, as you know, some people don't own a home. They live in an apartment or condo, so they can't control their outside environment. Is there something that people can do with their interiors to improve their health, relationships, or career?
Yeah, there's actually a lot, and I wish I could go over it in very, specific ways, but it really is unique to your floor plan. And so if, for instance, if you get the Feng Shui continuum and you figure it out, we have two 9 stars in every floor plan, unless it's specifically cut out of the floor plan because of its shape. But we have one that's called the 9 mountain star, or the mountain dragon. And inside, like in an apartment or a condo, you can literally put something earthen there for your virtual mountain. It might be a bowl of shells. It might be a nice ceramic pot. It could be some natural crystals. It could even be a plant, because there's soil and the pottery. So you can put something really earthen in that area, and it can help support health. And likewise, every floor plan has what we call the 9 water dragon, or water star. And in that area, you can put water, a fountain, a tabletop fountain, an aquarium. This is something that actually has surprised a lot of Feng Shui students. They're asking me, really? Can you really add water to that 9 energy? And the reason they ask is because 9 is essentially fire. And in the cycle of the elements, water puts out fire. You wouldn't normally want to do that. It would possibly cause heart or eye problems, putting pressure on the 9-star. But there are these exceptions, and there are these techniques which transcend strict 5-element theory. And that's one of them, with what we call the 9 water dragon. Inside, you can also add some water. It'd be good for financial luck. The other thing you can do is think about the south sector and make it a really nice place. Even if it's not a room that you use a lot, maybe it's at the end of the hallway, or maybe it's a guest room. Make it neat and tidy, nothing falling apart, nothing in ill repair. You're supporting that direction, and then that direction is going to support you. So make it lovely and clean and tidy.
So are there any misconceptions that people have about period 9?
Yeah, I mean, we've alluded to them a bit already today. For instance, some people think that every house is going to turn into a period 9 house just because it's like daylight savings time. Everybody turns their clock forward or back. No, it doesn't work that way in my experience. So that's a big misconception. I've gone to clients' homes, in the period 7 and period 8, and someone came before me, and I'm thinking, why did they do this? Why did they recommend this? And then I sit and do the chart, and I go, oh, they were doing the chart for the current era we're living in, not for when the house was built. So that's a misconception. And then the other is that some people think that if you just simply move into a house, let's say in period 9 now, that's going to switch it on. But that kind of defies the whole principles of flying star feng shui, which is about timing of, these huge influences, the sun and the planets and stars and the earth below. So those are, some of the biggest misconceptions people have.
So as we conclude our discussion about period 9 feng shui, anything else that you really want people to understand about period 9 feng shui?
Well, we've covered a lot. I think that people, especially those who have been either dabbling in feng shui or they are, serious practitioner, they just need to switch their minds over to relating to 9 as the long star, the same way they did with 8 in period 8, or the 7-star in period 7, and then those follow-up stars that are in like a B+ direction. For instance, like with the 2-star, we've added metal to that 2 Earth star to weaken it for over 100 years, because it was related to sickness. But now it's on the upbend. It's been reborn, and it's related to good health. And people are calling me or emailing me, and they're like, we're going to add fire to that. We're actually going to, try to increase that energy. And it depends, of course, on what other stars it's paired with. But yeah, we can start relating to these stars differently now. Some of them are the same. If you're familiar with the 5-star, it's not going to turn positive until the next century. So we're still, adding metal to the 5-star. But yeah, it does take a little bit of adjusting to get into a new era for people.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Our guest today has been author and Feng Shui consultant, Kartar Diamond, and you can find out more about Kartar Diamond and her wonderful work at fengshuisolutions.net. And if you've been feeling a shift of energy, it's because it has happened. And we are now, for the next 20 years, living in the fire element of period 9. Thank you so much for listening. And as you bring yourself into harmony with your environment, you'll feel yourself feeling better naturally. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.